Chapter 6, as we talked about the last couple of weeks, is all about Paul telling us that the fact that a person, when they become a Christian, we die to our old selves and we die to sin. And Paul argues in chapter 6 that if we're dead to sin, why in the world would we keep living in it? I mean, we should be done with sin, right? It should be over with. He uses baptism as an illustration to support his argument, saying that in baptism, it is a perfect picture. We're dying just as Jesus died. We're buried just as Jesus was buried. We're resurrected just as Jesus was resurrected. So we identify with all of that. Today we're going on into chapter 7, where he continues his argument, but he switches things up on his illustration. He goes to a new illustration now and uses the Old Testament law now as to illustrate his point. So let's jump in, chapter 7, verse 1. We'll hit the whole chapter today. He says, since I'm speaking to those who know the law, so we know there's Jewish people there in Rome who are reading his words and they're filtering this through what they understand of Scripture, which is the Old Testament law. So since I'm speaking to those who know the law, brothers and sisters, don't you know that the law rules over someone as long as he lives? Remember, he's saying, well, you died, so now the law doesn't rule over you because that's old. That's where he's going here. Verse 2, for example, a married woman is legally bound to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she's released from the law regarding the husband. So then if she's married to another man while her husband is living, she'll be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she's free from that law. Then, if she's married to another man, she's not an adulteress because she's free. She's no longer bound by those vows that we make, right? Verse 4, therefore, my brothers and sisters, you also were put to death in relation to the law through the body of Christ so that you belong to another. We no longer belong to the law, we belong to Jesus. There's been a separation because there was a death. You belong to him who was raised from the dead in order that we may bear fruit for God. For when we were in the flesh, the sinful passions aroused through the law were working in us to bear fruit for death. But now we've been released from the law since we have died to what held us so that we may serve in the newness, of the Spirit and not in the old letter of the law. Let's break this down a little bit. Talking marriage, talking relationship. I dug up an old picture and a fairly recent picture of Cheryl and I. We were married a long time ago. Our entire adult lives, we've been married to one another. It's been so long. If you look at this, you can barely, they don't even look like the same people, right? I mean, yes, that really is verifiably me, and that really is verifiably Cheryl. And at that time, I was 21 and she was 19. We looked each other in the eyes like people do at that time of a wedding, and we made commitment to one another, a vow to one another, communicating to the whole world that we were alone for that person, right? I was for Cheryl. Cheryl was for me. There was nobody else that would be in our lives. Neither one of us would be free to date other people or, connect in that way from that moment until death. That's how the vow goes. You know how that works. And so we made those vows. We understood, as you do, that, there's going to come a time when it's probably one of us will go before the other. I mean, it's pretty rare you both go together. I've done one funeral where the couple went together, and it was a tragic gas explosion in a house. Other than that, like in my experience, it just rarely happens where both go together. One of us is going to go first, and we both knew, as traumatic as that will be for the person who survives, it also frees the survivor from the vows that we made to one another. So whichever goes first, the other one is free to go on to be with other people, allowing us to start dating, which sounds horrible. I mean, I can't imagine. As some of you know, dating in the modern era, right? If desired to marry someone else, that is okay, that is legitimate, that is legal, that's good. And at that time, make the same commitment to that person that we made to each other so many years ago. And what Paul's saying is using that as an illustration to say, you realize that's what's going on with your relationship with God. You were once married to the law, and then you died. One of you died. Well, you died. You were buried. Jesus died. You took on his death. You died, and now you died to sin. You were once married to the law. Now you are to Jesus. spiritually speaking. Now hold that thought, because he goes on and talks about this relationship with people have with the law, just to kind of unfold that a little bit more. Then he'll kind of bring us back around, right? In verse 7. He says, well, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? I mean, is the law that bad of a thing? He says, well, absolutely not. But I would not have known sin if it were not for the law. It's revealed sin to us, right? For example, I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, do not covet. And sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me coveting of every kind. All of a sudden, you're like, I want everybody's stuff. Before, you might not have thought that. But since the law said don't do that, you're going, hey, that makes me want to do that. Just kind of how we're wired, right? Apart from the law, the sin is dead. Verse 9, once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang up to life, and I died. The commandment that was meant for life resulted in death for me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So then, the law is holy. The commandment is holy and just and good. Therefore, did what is good become death to me? Well, absolutely not. But sin, in order to be recognized as sin, was producing death in me through what is good, so that through the commandment, sin might become sinful beyond measure. All right, he gets really wordy on stuff. He's basically saying here, we're married to the law, and through that relationship, sin entered our lives, and through sin, that brought death to us, a future death, eternal death. The law did not covet, it said not to covet, which made me only want what other people had all the more. Verse 9 says, when the commandment came, the sin sprang into life. Once we learned what God did not want us to do, wanted us to not do, it made us want to do those things. I read this past week about a hotel that was built back in 1965. It's a 7-story tall, 225-room luxury hotel built on the historic Pleasure Pier in Galveston, Texas. It's called the USS Flagship Hotel. And this is a postcard from this hotel. As you can see from the postcard, back in its glory days, it was built like right on top of the water. It was right in the Gulf of Mexico, and so you just kind of felt like you were right there floating on the water. One of the great features of this hotel was on the ground floor. It was surrounded by large plate glass windows, so you could eat your gourmet meal in their fine dining area in a nice relaxing atmosphere, and then look out the window and just like enjoy, just feel like you're in the Gulf of Mexico. It's pretty cool place, it sounded like, from all the stuff I read about it. It had to be torn down back in 2008. It had been significant damage from Hurricane Ike. But here's a photo that's the most modern photo I could find. I couldn't find a modern healthy picture of it. So it's kind of beat up here, but it gives you an idea of what it looked like, kind of closer up. And here's the thing, as they were preparing to open this hotel, someone raised the issue, like, okay, we have this beautiful hotel, it's a luxury hotel, it's right on the water, you open the window, you get up, all these rooms have balconies, and you can go out there and you feel like you're in the Gulf of Mexico. How are we going to keep people from fishing off of their balcony? Because, I mean, come on, let's be honest, this is a great place to fish from. And so someone came up with the idea, well, how about if we put up signs on the balcony? No fishing from the balcony. And so they made signs for every single balcony of every single room. They put the signs up, no fishing. And the sign was a great idea. I mean, it really was. Who knows? I don't know how they came to it, but it was a great idea. Except for the fact that when the people showed up in their rooms, they read the sign and thought, that's a great idea. And so they'd unpack their stuff and they'd get their fishing gear out, and they'd open up and go up on their balcony. And what they would do is they would put the big, heaviest sinkers they could find, maybe multiple ones, on their line, because they're going to cast that puppy out there a ways. They want to get it past, everything and get it into the water. So it was extra heavy weight they put on their sinkers and their hooks and lines, all the stuff, and they'd give it all that weight. And they would cast the line out, and sometimes the line was maybe shorter than they thought it was, and it stopped. Or maybe there was a tangle, or something happened where it would go flying out there and it would stop. Well, now it's out, so it's not going to come back to the balcony, right? So what it would do, it was then swing immediately back toward the hotel and go right into the windows of the cafeteria, the dining area. Breaking multiple windows. Like it was just people were continually breaking windows in this hotel. Or maybe they were on a top floor and it'd come down and break the third floor, balcony door. Or, there was all kinds of problems. Hooks were getting stuck in the balcony. The place was starting to smell like dead fish. This is like a luxury hotel, right? And it was a mess. It was awful. And so they came back together and said, what in the world are we going to do about this? We've got to stop this. We're doing everything we can. We made these nice, beautiful signs. Everybody's fishing from the balcony. And someone came up with a brilliant idea. How about if we take the signs down? So they took the signs down, and it stopped. Because there was no sign there giving people the idea. They wouldn't have come up with that idea on their own. They might have thought it's beautiful, or they might have thought about it, but they just wouldn't have really done it. But when they saw this sign, it made them want to fish all the more. And that became the problem. Paul's basically saying here, our relationship with God and the law, that's it. God says don't do something, and all of a sudden we're like, I never would have thought of that, but now that you mention it, that's a great idea. And then we start doing things, and that leads to death. Our relationship with God and the law, there was nothing wrong with the law. The problem was us, because we're the ones who broke it. We're the ones who when sin sprang into action and we disobeyed. God said, don't do that. And we thought, well, now I have to. I can't. That's all I can think about. I can't not do that. And that's what we have done. Then Paul adds, but now you've died. You've died to sin. Right? That marriage is over. You're no longer married to sin. It's over. The new relationship is with Jesus Christ. You're no longer obligated to pursue all the pleasures of the flesh. Your obligation now is to follow Jesus and his ways. And that's really great. You can analytically look at that and go, well, okay, I get that. I understand it. It's cut off. I'm no longer married to sin. Now I'm married to Jesus. I can leave that behind. I can walk. I have this new relationship with Jesus. I can walk away from that and walk to him. No longer pursuing it. My obligation is to Jesus. The problem is the emotional part, I think, of this. Just like a marriage relationship with a person, if your spouse dies and you know in your heart of hearts you're free to be with someone else, you can form relationships with other people. You know that, you understand that logically, but you know what? Your heart is still with your former spouse. It's not like you just cut everything off. It's like, oh, going on now with my life. Your heart is still with that person. Part of your heart will always be with that former spouse. Translate that to your relationship with God. And Paul says you used to be married to sin. You did whatever you wanted. You followed all the pleasures, all your heart's desired. You did everything you wanted. You hurt people and loved things. We've all been there. We all get that. We did that because that's how we are. And then you became a Christian, and you had all those sins wiped clean. They were all taken away. You died to that former relationship that you have with the flesh, and you walked out saying, man, from here on out, it's Jesus all the time, 100%, always. It's the new relationship. I had this great relationship with him. I mean, that's what Paul was talking about in chapter 6 when he said, how can we who died to sin still live in it? I'm living for Jesus now. For we know, verse 6, that our old self was crucified with him so that the body ruled by sin might be rendered powerless, so that we may no longer be enslaved to sin, since a person who has died is freed from sin. That's my past. I've walked away. Verse 14, for sin will not rule over you because you are not under the law, but under grace. Our relationship with sin is over. We died. Our new relationship with Jesus, but part of our heart still belongs to that old relationship in the flesh. It wasn't a perfect relationship. I mean, it was killing us. It brought death spiritually to us. It's not even a good relationship, but there were parts of it we really enjoyed. There are parts of it that made us feel good. There are parts of that relationship with sin that made us feel good about ourselves. Sometimes we actually, even as Christians, miss doing some of the things of the flesh that we were so married to before Jesus. And so once in a while, we go back and we rekindle that relationship with the flesh. That's the human condition. We know it's dead. We know we're separated. We know we have a new, a better way to live. But sometimes we still go back. Here's how Paul says it in verse 14. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am flesh. Sold as a slave under sin, the struggle of chapter 6. For I do not understand what I am doing, because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate. I understand we're separated, we're divorced. Not divorce is dead. There's been a death. I'm not obligated. But my heart still goes there. Right? Now, if I do, verse 16, what I do not want to do, I agree with the law that it is good. So now I am no longer the one doing it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my flesh. For the desire to do what is good is with me, but there is no ability to do it. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but I practice the evil that I do not want to do. Now, if I do what I do not want, I am no longer the one that does it, but the sin that lives in me. So I discover this law. When I want to do what is good, evil is present with me. For in my inner self, I delight in God's law, but I see a different law in the parts of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and taking me a prisoner to the law of sin in the parts of my body. Spiritually, I have died to sin. I accepted Jesus Christ. I accepted his forgiveness. I've committed myself to him. I have a new vow. Rather than to please me, I'm going to please him. And that is my new commitment. That is my new life. This is where I'm at. But I also may have died spiritually. I may have killed the old person spiritually, but I still live in this body of flesh. That's why the Christian addict continues to struggle with their addiction, whatever the addiction is. It's rare you just walk away and say, oh, I'm done, and just never struggle again, because our flesh, our heart goes back there. It might be just once a month, might be once a year, whatever, but the heart goes back and it just wants to relive what it once did. That's why we sometimes fall into old habits. That's why our heart sometimes wanders into places it doesn't belong. That's why our minds sometimes go to places that you wouldn't expect a Christian to go. For a brief moment, you think, I really want to strangle that person. And you really do. I'm pretty sure I want to ram that car that pulled out in front of me. I wonder if I have a chance with him or her, that person. I'm married, but what if I got a chance? Just the thought flutters through your mind, a temptation, the old flesh coming back. We're not the only ones. The Apostle Paul struggled with it as well. Times he says he actually did the things he didn't want to do. He says, I did not want that to happen, and I did it. There were times he actually did not do the things he knew he should be doing. Now, this isn't like some dude in the back row of the church at Rome hiding in the shadows. This is Paul. It's Paul saying this, the apostle, right? It's him. Very next words reveal his internal battle. What a wretched man I am. Again, this is the Apostle Paul. He's talking about himself, the guy who wrote most of the New Testament that we read, the guy who was beaten, mistreated, abused, stoned, left for dead because of his faith. And he'd do it again. It wasn't like he lacked faith. It wasn't like he didn't believe or he was wavering. Do I really believe? He really believed in Jesus. But Paul looks in the mirror and says, what a wretched man I am. I'm guessing every single one of us have looked in the mirror and said the same thing at some point. What a wretched man I am. What a wretched woman I am. Why can't I get complete control? I died to sin. I read that in Romans 6. What's wrong with me? And he finishes that confession with a question, who will rescue me, verse 24, who will rescue me from this body of death? This body that keeps showing up, this flesh that keeps revealing itself, who's going to rescue me from this? And he answers it in the very next verse, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then with my mind, I myself am serving the law of God, but with my flesh, the law of sin. Our soul craves Jesus. Our spirit craves him. We desire to follow him 100% fully devoted at all moments, at all time. We want everything, mind, body, soul, spirit, everything. We want everything. And our flesh continually pulls us back, trying to bring us to a place of death. That's the struggle. It's the struggle. Who will rescue us from this insanity? Jesus. It's the Sunday school answer, I know, but it's accurate. It's real. We go to him for forgiveness. He washes our sin away again and again. We shake ourselves off. We continue forward in our relationship with Jesus. I really think that's the point of these last couple chapters, is like he brings down the hammer in chapter 6, like, stop it. You're died to that. You're no longer slaves to that. Just stop it. But he also understands it's going to happen because you live in the flesh. That's things you do. I'm not talking living in full-out rebellion. I'm just saying there's be times the flesh will take over and grab you. And I think his challenge is to keep fighting those battles. Don't just roll over. We mentioned that really last week. Don't just, okay, whatever, I can't help it. It's just, I can't help it. I sin every day. Don't go there. But you keep fighting that battle, allowing the Spirit to take over, allowing the Spirit to control more and more until your dying breath and the flesh is over. Then you live for eternity and you're fine, you're free from that. But until that, you keep fighting that battle, fighting the evil inside you, fighting the temptation to stray from God, fighting to grow and mature and to keep steady in your walk with Jesus. Never stop, because the moment you do, you start sliding backwards and kind of drifting down. We all know that because we've all done that. The Christian relationship, experience is not one of coasting, because you only coast one direction. You start coasting toward the flesh. And it's really, I think, a challenge for us to stay engaged in the Spirit. I love where this leads us next week, because Paul turns a corner after all this talk that we've had here about sin and wrath and forgiveness and struggle. And he says in chapter 8, verse 1, that we'll look at next week, says, therefore there is now no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. That's a good verse. That's a good place to be. Again, we'll talk about that next week. What I want to do this week is just end. It just seems like all these first few chapters have been heavy and deep, and it's just been pounding on us, and I don't know where you are spiritually. I don't know where you are in your relationship with God, in this battle between flesh and spirit and whatever. I don't know what's going on in your world. But if your flesh has been winning more of the battles lately than your spirit, I want to give you an opportunity to right here, right now, turn that back over to Jesus. Go back to Jesus for forgiveness. It's just you and God. This is a moment between you and Jesus Christ. Go to the throne room right now of God. Just say, God, I am so sorry. I have allowed the flesh to win more than the Spirit. That's where he's taken us here. Of course you failed. Well, let's clean that up. Go to the cross. If you've allowed yourself to become complacent or lazy or apathetic in your faith, take that to the cross. Ask for forgiveness. Ask for help. Ask for his Spirit to fill you in such a way that you have love and joy and peace and patience and self-control and all the things that Galatians talks about. We're going to pause. And again, it's just you. It's between you and God. Take a moment to pray. Spend some time alone. Take care of whatever you need to take care of. Confess every sin. And be specific. Oh, I'm bad. Tell him. He knows. He's not going to be shocked. Whatever's going on, be specific with him. Recommit that relationship you have with him. Even good marriages, every once in a while, have a recommitment. You know, do that now. Recommit your desire to live in the Spirit over the flesh. So you can walk out of this room today completely holy and pure and right before God. That's all we care about. That's all you need right now. If you've never given your life to Christ, this would be a great time to do so in that one-on-one. If you've never been baptized, today would be a great time to do it. Take care of that. Let nothing keep you from leaving this building today completely right with God. What an opportunity we all have. Take a few moments. Pray. I'll close in prayer in a few moments.